On the fogged-up window of room 306, someone had written a promise, and then ... vanished. No name on the chart, no record of discharge, no explanation, just a sentence traced by a finger, as if left there by an invisible breath. Those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength. The nurse who walked in that morning thought it was just condensation, but when she tried to wipe it away, the sentence didn't disappear. On the contrary, it became even clearer in the sliver of light slipping through the curtain. At that moment, she felt something in the air, something between the sacred and the strange, as if that room had been visited by someone who wasn't entirely from this world. The hospital was still asleep. The pulse of monitors echoed in the distance, mixed with the low hum of oxygen machines and the soft whisper of prayers, some spoken out loud, others only thought, and in the midst of that heavy silence, that room seemed to breathe on its own. During the night shift, an elderly patient reported seeing a man standing by the door, silent, with a Bible in his hand. She blinked, and he was gone. Hospital management found no record of entry. The nurses swore no one had left, but the promise on the window remained. And that's when something started to change. Days later, a new patient would be assigned to that same bed, a man broken from within, carrying a pain even medicine couldn't reach. And when he saw the sentence on the window, he laughed, thought it was just cheap poetry. But there was more than words in that sentence. There was a calling, a memory, a key if you know someone who needs strength to keep going. Write their name in the comments. Maybe their miracle starts with what you're about to witness. James McCall didn't want to be admitted. The silence in the hospital made him uneasy, like the walls were listening to his deepest thoughts. But that winter morning, his body gave him no choice. After a sudden collapse at home, dehydrated, weak, unable to urinate for 2 days, he was taken to the ER by his neighbor, who had grown suspicious of the lights being off since the previous night. The diagnosis was blunt, almost clinical: advanced kidney failure. The doctors spoke gently, but James didn't care to listen. All he heard was, "You're going to have to stay." And so he did. They took him to room 306. He didn't know yet. Days before, someone had vanished there, leaving behind only a sentence on the window. The room was small, cold, sterile. Lights struggled to get through the half-closed blinds, and the steady beep of the monitor mocked his attempt to pretend he wasn't fragile. As he sat on the bed, he looked at the window, and that's when he saw it. 3 short lines, drawn as if by a wet finger on glass. "Those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength." James read it and scoffed. "Strength," he muttered. "Maybe just enough to die slowly." He had never been an atheist, but faith hadn't lived in him for years. Not since his youngest son passed away 6 years ago. After that, James stopped praying, stopped hoping. Grief had dried him out from the inside. What used to be promise had turned to scar. That first night, James couldn't sleep. The mattress was uncomfortable, and the 4 in his arm made any position difficult. The sound of other people's pain echoed down the hallway, and he wondered if anyone there ever truly rested. At 3 a.m., the room went especially still. No footsteps, no noise, only the soft hum of the monitor. And then he saw it, a shadow moving. Beneath the door, a pair of bare feet, motionless. The light from the nurse's station outlined a shape, but no one knocked, no one entered. When James opened the door, the hallway was empty, not a soul in sight. Just cold, just silence, just he manned that sentence on the window. The next day, he asked the nurse who had stayed in the room before him. She furrowed her brow, checked the digital sheet, and replied plainly, that room was closed for a few days. Maintenance and deep cleaning. But someone wrote on the window. He insisted. She shrugged and said, it must have been the cleaning crew, that sometimes markings reappear when moisture returns. James didn't respond, but deep down, something scratched at his chest. That sentence didn't feel random, and the handwriting, it had weight. Like someone wrote it knowing it would be read, like an invisible signature. Later that afternoon, a black woman with graying hair tied in a colorful scarf stepped in. It was Mrs. Evelyn, one of the cleaning staff. She smiled the way only those who've lived long enough to lose their hurry do. She asked if she could mop the floor, and James nodded silently. When she saw the writing on the window, she paused, stared at it for a few seconds, then took a deep breath and said, "He left that for you." James turned. She smiled gently. "The man who was here, he didn't have a name on the chart, but he used to hum softly. Every evening, James wanted to know more, but she simply concluded, some people don't need to be remembered by name, only by the faith they leave behind. That night, James couldn't take his eyes off the sentence on the window. He sat for hours, staring at those words like they were a question, or a memory, or an old wound. He thought of his son Liam, thought of the days in the ICU praying, thought of the last time he knelt, and thought maybe there really was a strength beyond the body's strength. But just as quickly, he shook his head like waking from a dream. Strength doesn't bring anyone back, he whispered, and turned off the light. But just before closing his eyes, he saw something strange. The streetlight outside reflected against the glass, and made the sentence glow, as if it had been written in fire. Just the light, he thought, but his heart raced, because in that reflection, for a second, he thought he saw something more. A shadow behind the words, as if someone was watching him from the other side. And it was in that twilight between sleep and resistance that James dreamed of a man. He stood with his back to the bed, arms open, a glow surrounding his head. He didn't speak, just breathed. James tried to see his face, but something held him back. When he stepped closer, he woke up in a cold sweat, looked around, alone. The sentence was still there, but now there was a second line written below it, and no one would ever be able to explain how it got there. The next morning, James woke up with a strange feeling in his chest, as if something had shifted inside him, but he couldn't say what. He stood with difficulty, body still heavy, and walked to the window. The daylight was weak, grayish, but on the glass something new. Below the first sentence, a second line, they will walk and not grow weary. Same handwriting, same firm stroke. James touched the glass, cold and real. The nurse came in with the breakfast tray, and he asked, "Who wrote this?" She looked startled. That wasn't there yesterday. He stayed silent, unsure if he wanted to sound crazy or just curious. But deep down, he felt this wasn't a joke, nor a hallucination. This was a sign. He just didn't know of what. After his blood work, he pushed the attending resident. "I want to know who was in this room before me." The doctor smiled awkwardly. "Mr. McCall, that room had been closed for maintenance. A leak in the ceiling. It was only reopened 2 days ago." James raised his eyebrows, and before that, the doctor checked his tablet. No records for the last 10 days. The emptiness in the history annoyed James. Nothing. No patient, no staff noticed anyone here. Probably a system glitch, the doctor said, but the unease remained. James knew what he had seen, and now he knew what he was feeling. Later that day, Mrs. Evelyn showed up again, this time with a mop, a bucket, and a small radio tucked in her apron. She hummed softly an old melody, the kind that seems to have been born with time itself. James called her over. "You said the man who was here used to sing. Do you remember the song?" She paused for a few seconds. "It was a hymn, one of those the elders sing without even knowing where it came from. But I remember a line, something like, 'He gives strength to the weary.'" James' eyes widened. That was almost exactly what was on the window. Evelyn went on, "I thought maybe he was a preacher, or one of those who live with a Bible in their hands. But he had a strange way about him, a gaze that looked right through you, like he already knew what I was going to ask." James stood up and walked over to the mirror, looked at his own reflection for a long second, then turned to face the window, and asked quietly, as if expecting a reply, "Who were you?" But the room stayed silent. Only the monitor beeped in response. Deep down, James knew he was dealing with something beyond the ordinary, something that defied medical logic, something between heaven and flesh. That afternoon, James was cleared to walk the halls. He moved slowly through each wing, studying the faces, looking for something familiar, a presence, a sign, and then he saw it. A framed photo in the geriatric wing, black and white, a man in a suit, Bible in hand, beside a hospital bed. At the bottom, the caption read, "Chaplain Samuel Elion, 1963. James' heart sped up. That face, was the same as in his dream. Same shape, same gaze, same silence. He called the nurse over. "Who's that?" she replied. "That was the hospital's first chaplain. They say he prayed for every patient before he left. Died. Over 50 years ago." James swallowed hard. It couldn't be, but it was. He knew. The name Elion pounded in his mind, like it had been carved into his soul. That night, he had the same dream, but this time, the man was sitting at the foot of the bed, whispering something James couldn't understand. He woke up with tears in his eyes and sweat on his skin. He grabbed a piece of paper and a pen and wrote, "If you can hear me, ... give me a sign." He taped it to the window, just below the two existing lines. By morning, a third line had appeared. "They will soar on wings like eagles." James didn't write it. The nurse didn't write it. Evelyn swore the window had been clean. And yet there it was. Another line, another promise, and in that moment, everything aligned. He remembered an old verse, one his father used to recite when he was a boy. Isaiah, something about renewing strength, running without growing tired, flying. James rushed to ask for a Bible. The nurse brought him one from the chapel, worn with yellowed pages and fingerprint smudges. He flipped through urgently until he found it. Isa 40 banding 31, and there they were. Every sentence, one after another, written thousands of years ago. And now, on the glass of his hospital room, he closed his eyes, felt a lump in his throat, touched the verse with his fingertips, and for the first time since burying his son, he prayed, not with pretty words, but with truth, with surrender, with an exposed heart. God, ... I'm still here. And if you're still here too, ... show me what to do with the strength you promised. And it was in that silent prayer that the change began. That morning, James sat still for nearly an hour, his eyes fixed on the page of the Bible, locked onto Isaiah 42:31. "But those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength." He repeated it over and over, like a code, a secret password that might unlock something deep within him. But no matter how much he read, no matter how much he wanted to believe, something resisted. It was like trying to light a candle in a flooded room. The flame just wouldn't catch. His heart was still too full of rubble. In the following days, he tried to pray, but it felt like speaking to someone who wouldn't answer. The words came out hard, dry, uncomfortable. "Lord, I don't know what to say." Silence. "Can you hear me?" Silence. The shame, mixed with anger, made him stop every time. It was like reopening a wound that hadn't finished bleeding. And in the space between those attempts, James began to write. Small phrases, confused requests, fragmented verses. He taped each one to the window, as if building a spiritual puzzle. The nurse noticed, her eyes welling up. She shared that her daughter, Hope, at just 9 years old, had done something similar. Diagnosed with leukemia, she used to write prayers on her bedroom wall with colored chalk, every day, for months. One day, she wrote, "Jesus is already here." And a few days later, the scans showed complete regression of the disease. James didn't say a word, but that story stuck to him like a breeze that refuses to leave. He started reading more, whispered the Psalms at night before falling asleep. He was embarrassed to be heard, but there was something intimate in it, like every word had been written just for him, like deep down, God was still there, waiting. One night, the corridor lights suddenly went out. The hospital dimmed into half-light, and in that moment, he heard a voice, soft, low, inside his mind. "You are not alone." Startled, he got up, thought it was a hallucination, called the nurse, but no one was nearby. When he returned to the room, another line had appeared on the window. "They will run and not grow weary." It was the third part of the same verse. He hadn't written it. He didn't sleep that night, just sat there, a blanket over his shoulders, staring at the glass until morning. Mrs. Evelyn returned the next day with a small notebook in hand. She gave it to him without a word. Inside were verses taped to the pages, scriptures about comfort, strength, and hope. "It's what helped me when I lost my brother," she said. "I pieced together the Bible like stitching a quilt, and that's how God covered me." James thanked her, began copying verses into his own notebook, sometimes mixing them with things his son used to say, childhood memories, or questions he had never dared to ask. One afternoon, walking through the pediatric wing, James saw a boy holding a Bible that looked bigger than him. He was reading aloud to no one. A doctor stopped beside him and asked, "Why do you read if no one's listening?" The boy replied, "Because God hears differently." The words hit James like lightning. Back in his room, he knelt for the first time. With trembling hands, he rested his forehead on the mattress and whispered, "Lord, ... if you still know me, if you still remember me, then come now. I'm ready." And he stayed there. No answers, no signs, no instant miracles, but he stayed. And something changed out the next day. A young woman visited the hospital. She was looking for someone named Elion. Staff told her no one with that name had been admitted. She insisted that someone by that name had written letters to her father. Before he passed letters filled with passages from Isaiah, the chaplain listened to her story and led her to the chapel. There, among old documents, they found a signature repeated across several worn pages. Elian S. James heard about it from the nurse, and for some reason, he felt drawn to see the chapel himself. He asked for permission and went. Inside, he found a wall covered in photos and notes left by patients. One caught his eye, written in small, faded letters. "Strength doesn't live in the body, it lives in the one who sustains it." And beneath it, the signature, Elion. He placed his hand over the words, closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and there, for the first time, he felt peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning, of purpose. And he decided, if he walked out of that hospital, he would tell this story. What he didn't know was that this decision, in itself, was already an answer. The following days weren't easy. James' body fluctuated between brief improvements and sudden setbacks. His legs still hurt. Test results remained inconclusive. The doctors adjusted his medication carefully, but something inside him was no longer the same. The anger had loosened its grip. The pride had begun to soften. And where resistance once lived, a sincere question had taken root. What if God was still here? On Thursday morning, the nurse walked in with a tired expression. She sat beside the bed and shared that her daughter, Hope, was home with a high fever. "It's nothing serious, but you know that feeling of helplessness?" James nodded. It was the same feeling he'd had since the day he held his son's lifeless body. Only someone who's watched someone they love suffer truly understands. That word, the nurse smiled faintly. Prayer kept me standing, even when I wanted to fall. After she left, James sat in the armchair near the window. The glass was clean, but the sentence still felt present, even without being written. "Those who trust in the Lord, .. he repeated, not with sarcasm this time, but with a shy kind of hope, like someone relearning how to speak after years of silence. That afternoon, he asked for a Bible of his own. The old one from the chapel was too marked up. He wanted one he could write in, underline, have a conversation with God. The nurse brought him a brand new one, and James began, first with Psalms, then with Isaiah. At night, he read until he fell asleep, sometimes with the book resting on his chest, as if the gesture itself protected him from something unseen. One early morning, he woke to a soft noise, like a piece of paper falling. He looked at the door. No one. On the floor, a folded note. No name, no sender. Inside, handwritten, "Not fear, for I am with you." James recognized it instantly. Isaiah 41. He smiled. "Now you're teasing me, huh?" he whispered. But deep down, he felt held. In the days that followed, he created a little ritual. Each morning, he'd open the Bible to a random page and underline something, then copy the verse onto paper and tape it to the window. The nurse noticed, so did Mrs. Evelyn. Soon, other patients started visiting room 306 not to see James, but to read the verses on the glass. It was as if the space itself had become sacred. One afternoon, an elderly woman named Clara, hospitalized for heart complications, asked to sit there. For a few minutes, she said she felt peace in that place, that her hands shook less there, that her pain ... felt more bearable. James didn't quite understand it, but he knew it wasn't about him. It was about something being built, something he was merely a part of. One night, while reading Isaiah again, he felt the urge to pray for Hope, the nurse's daughter, but he didn't know how. So he wrote, "Renew the strength of the little ones, heal with your gentleness." He taped the note to the glass and went to sleep. The next morning, the nurse walked in crying. Hope had woken up healthy, no fever, laughing, asking for pancakes. She asked me if someone had prayed for her last night. James smiled. Maybe someone did. That night, James had another dream. He was in an open field, clear sky. Beside him walked the same man from before. This time, his face was visible, but blurred, as if it were made of light. He didn't speak, just walked in silence, barefoot on the grass. In the distance, a soft choir sang, "They shall mount up with wings as eagles, .. He woke up sweating, but not afraid. For the first time, the dream didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a reminder, like someone was saying, "You're coming back, you're coming home." In the following days, James wrote on the window with more confidence. The phrases stopped being questions. They became declarations. One read, "This is where my healing begins." Another, "There are still wings for those who wait." Room 36 began to be known among the staff as the Promise Room. Some left anonymous notes on the windowsill. Others stopped by just to breathe the air. Evelyn brought a pastor friend to visit. He prayed, read Isaiah 40, and wept. Said he hadn't felt something like that in years. Then, on a Sunday morning, something happened. James asked for paper and wrote a long message, then taped it to the window. It read, "If you're here, reading this, and feel like there's no path left, know that it was here, in this room, where I found strength in a place of ashes." That night, a new patient would be admitted. James was to be transferred to another wing. The staff cleaned the room as usual, but strangely, the message on the window wouldn't come off. No matter how hard they scrubbed, no matter what product they used, it stayed as if it had been written by another hand, one not of this world. And that's how, in weakness, James found God again. Not with thunder, not with dazzling miracles, but with a sentence, a visitor, a psalm hidden on glass. Room 306 was ready for its next patient, but something in it had changed, not visible, not measurable, but those who entered felt it. That the nurse noticed first. She said the air felt lighter, even the monitors sounded softer. When James was moved to recovery, he took only his things and left one final note on the window. In his handwriting, it said, "If you're reading this, don't give up." The next day, the new patient arrived. His name was Peter. He was in his early 50s, recently diagnosed with stomach cancer, and carried in his eyes the look of someone already tired before the battle even began. As soon as he stepped into the room, he noticed the sentence on the window. "Is this part of a new hospital program?" he asked the nurse. She hesitated. "Well, sort of. Let's say it started with someone who decided not to give up." Peter didn't respond, but he kept staring at the sentence. Read it, reread it, fell silent. That night, as he tried to sleep, he couldn't. The phrase echoed in his mind, "Don't give up." But what does it mean not to give up when your body already wants to stop, when life feels drained of meaning? In the middle of the night, Peter got up, restless, sat in the armchair near the window. The streetlight cast shadows across the floor, and that's when he saw it. A faint mark on the glass, just below James's sentence, a verse almost faded, but still legible. "They will run and not grow weary." He touched it with his finger, cold, real. Beside it, an old piece of tape with a torn scrap of paper. Peter didn't know what it meant, but something inside him broke. He wept quietly. That next morning, he asked for a Bible. He had never been religious, but if there was something here, he wanted to understand it. He read Isaiah 40, read other passages, and before he realized it, he started writing. At first, timid words, almost embarrassed. Then, full sentences. On the second day, he taped a new verse to the window. On the third, a prayer. On the fourth, he was replying to other patients' notes. Then Evelyn returned to the room. She smiled. When she saw the new writings, "I knew this place wasn't going to stop speaking." Peter chuckled, his face still swollen from that morning's tears. "Speaking, this window feels like it has a mouth and a heart." Evelyn answered gently, "Maybe it does. Maybe it's just saying what many people need to hear." No one knew exactly how it started, but other rooms began to have notes on the windows too. It wasn't hospital policy, it was just faith spreading in silence. Some notes read, "You are not alone." Others, "This pain does not define you." And more, "I survived, you will too." James, now recovering in another wing, heard about the movement and asked to visit room 361 last time. He walked in slowly. The room was empty for a few minutes. He approached the window, touched the glass, and saw something he didn't expect. His very first note. Still there, faded, but intact. Beside it, dozens of new messages. One of them read, "I read your words, James, and they saved my night." He took a deep breath, left a new message, unsigned, "The strength you need is already inside you." Then he left, saying nothing, just turned back one last time, like someone quietly saying goodbye to a part of themselves. Weeks later, the hospital decided to keep the notes. They created a space called the Window of Promises. Any patient could write, tape, read, or simply sit silently before the messages. What had once been just a room became a movement. What had once been pain became a chain of hope. Peter was discharged a month later. The doctors said the tumor had responded surprisingly well to treatment. He said maybe part of the healing began before the chemo went. He started believing there was still something worth fighting for. On his last day, he left a sealed envelope at the front desk. It was addressed to the one who wrote on the window, "Before me," inside a simple letter. "You don't know me, but your words saved me. I entered the hospital ready to give up, and I left ready to live. Thank you for leaving light in a place where so many only see darkness." James never received that letter, but somehow, he felt it, because there are words you write with a pen, and others, that are written into the soul. Time passed. Not much, just enough for room 306 to welcome new patients, new stories, new pain. But one thing remained, the window. It was no longer just glass. It had become a kind of silent altar, where promises continued to be taped, written, whispered. Some messages didn't last long. Others seemed to withstand the strongest cleaners. But all of them had one thing in common. They came from a sincere place. James was finally discharged a few weeks later. He walked slowly, carrying a small bag and a folded envelope in the pocket of his jacket. No goodbyes, no fuss. He simply left, passed the reception, signed the papers, and before walking out the front doors, he turned to look down the hallway where it had all started. It looked different, brighter, more alive, but he knew the change wasn't in the walls, it was in him. In the days that followed, James tried to return to routine. Grocery, bills, silence, but something kept tugging at him. A calling that grew louder each night. He started writing his memories, not as therapy, but as a mission. He bought a hardcover notebook and wrote on the first page, "The promises I heard without hearing." On the pages that followed, he described the dreams, the notes, the encounters. One Sunday afternoon, he felt the urge to visit the cemetery where his son was buried. He brought flowers and the notebook, sat in the grass for hours, spoke out loud, laughed, cried. Then he pulled out a cloth, wiped the glass on the headstone, and wrote with his finger, "We will run together again." He left it there, not for anyone to read, but as a response, a promise returned. A few days later, he decided to share his story online. He recorded a simple video, his phone propped up on a stack of books. He read excerpts from what he'd written, showed the psalm, spoke about the window, about Evelyn, about the man who vanished. The video had few views at first, but the comments started to grow, and they all said the same thing: "I needed this today." One night, as he checked the comments before bed, he noticed a different name. A profile called Elion_Light had left just one sentence: "Keep writing. There are still promises waiting to be posted." James clicked the profile. The account didn't exist. No photo, no posts, no followers. He refreshed the page. Nothing. It had vanished. But the comment, remained. He read the sentence again and again, lay down with it, echoing in his mind. Elion, the name of the chaplain in the old photos. The name on the chapel papers. The name that appeared in his dreams. Now, the name of a profile that showed up and disappeared. In the days that followed, James returned to the hospital. He asked to visit room 306 once more. They allowed it. He walked in slowly. No patient was there at the time. The room was silent. On the glass, only a few notes, but one caught his eye. Written in firm, recent handwriting, it read, "If you trust, you are not alone." Beside it, taped to the window, was a torn page from the Bible, Isaiah 42:31. He couldn't explain what he felt. It was part reverence, part gratitude. He touched the window, then looked up and said, "I don't know who you were, but I know what you did." Before leaving, he wrote one more sentence, the last one. It said, "Promises don't disappear. They just wait for someone to believe again." And so, James returned home. But now, he carried more than stories. He carried a calling. He started a channel called Windows of Promise. He wasn't chasing followers. He simply shared stories, verses, prayers. People began sending in their stories, letters, photos of windows with taped messages, from hospitals, from homes, from nursing centers. An invisible network began to form. A nurse from another state wrote, saying a terminal patient had asked to die facing a window, because that's where God answers. A pastor shared that he had taped Isaiah 42:31 to his wife's mirror while she was in a coma. On the seventh day, she woke up. A 9-year-old child recited the verse in a video for his sick grandmother, and the video went viral. James read it all, kept it all, and one night, he wrote in his notebook, "The man who wrote on the window never really left. He was just waiting for someone to keep writing." And maybe that's exactly what it was, because when someone writes in faith, even the foggiest window becomes an altar, and whoever reads it is never the same again.